There's a reason Russian paleontologists don't sleep well at night. It has nothing to do with politics. See, when you spend your days digging up fossils of creatures that make Godzilla look like a house pet, you start to realize that Mother Nature had some serious anger management issues back in the day. We're talking about the time where Russia was basically one giant horror movie set, complete with saber-toothed predators the size of cars, armored tanks with attitudes, and sea monsters that could swallow a school bus without chewing. And the truly disturbing part, these things were all neighbors. Here's what you need to know about prehistoric Russia. First off, forget everything you think you know about cold weather and snow. We're talking about a time when Russia was basically a giant oven with teeth. The whole place was hot, dry, and filled with things that wanted to eat you. Back in the Permian period, around 250 million years ago, Russia wasn't even Russia yet. It was stuck to this massive supercontinent called Pangaea. And let me tell you, the real estate was terrible. Picture vast deserts where the temperature could cook you during the day, then maybe drop just enough at night so that you could freeze to death instead. Fun times. The plants are weird too. No flowers, no grass, just these bizarre ferns and early trees that looked uncomfortable being alive. And the animals, well, they hadn't figured out how to be normal yet. Everything was either too big, too spiky, or too interested in turning other things into lunch. Then we get to the dinosaur times, and Russia decided to really show off. Climate got a bit nicer, which apparently was an anxious way of saying, let's see how big we can make these murder lizards. Even the Arctic parts of Russia were warm enough for dinosaurs to set up shop and start their own little nightmare communities. The seas weren't safe either. While all this land-based chaos was happening, the oceans around Russia were basically shark-infested swimming pools, except the sharks were the size of school buses and had way more teeth than anything has a right to have, because the real nightmare wasn't on land. Meet Pliosaurus rossicus, and yeah, that skull really was the size of a refrigerator. Scientists found this thing near the Volga River, which makes you wonder what else is hiding in Russian waterways. This creature was what happens when evolution decides regular predators aren't scary enough. We're talking about something that stretched 30 feet from nose to tail and weighed as much as 3 cars. But here's the really disturbing part. Its head took up about a quarter of that length. Just imagine a swimming nightmare that is mostly mouth. The teeth were designed for one job, and that job was making other things very dead, very quickly. Each tooth was shaped so it could punch through bone without any trouble. Russian paleontologists found these things back in 1948. I bet the guy who first dug up that skull needed some therapy afterwards. Pliosaurus rossicus lived in the Jurassic seas that covered parts of Russia about 150 million years ago. Back then, much of western Russia was underwater, which sounds peaceful until you realize things were lurking down there waiting for the next meal to swim by. This predator didn't mess around with chasing its food. It was built for ambush attacks, hiding in murky water until something swam close enough, then launching itself forward with those 4 massive flippers. The bite force could crush a small car, and once those jaws clamped down, nothing was getting away. The really unsettling thing about Pliosaurus rossicus is that it was smart enough to hunt strategically. These weren't just mindless eating machines. They were calculating patient killers that ruled their underwater world completely. And if you thought a whale-sized murder machine was bad, wait until you meet what was hunting on dry ground. Inostrancevia walked around ancient Russia carrying 2 6-inch knives in its mouth. And that wasn't a metaphor. It had actual 6-inch saber teeth that could slice through pretty much anything that had the bad luck to be made of meat. Russian paleontologists dug up the first Inostrancevia fossils in 1876, and you have to wonder what the person thought when they found those teeth. This predator was about the size of a large bear, except bears don't typically come equipped with built-in steak knives. Inostrancevia lived around 250 million years ago in what's now northern Russia, back when the area was a seasonal hellscape of droughts and floods. The really disturbing part about Inostrancevia wasn't just the teeth. The whole animal was designed for killing efficiently. It had strong legs for chasing things down, powerful neck muscles for delivering devastating bites, and a skull built to handle the stress of driving those sabers into struggling prey. Scientists think it hunted the armored plant eaters of its time, which means it was regularly taking down creatures the size of cars. And apparently it was good at this job, because Inostrancevia fossils show up everywhere in late Permian Russia. This wasn't some rare monster hiding in caves. This was the neighborhood apex predator. The teeth were curved and sharp enough to punch through thick hide and bone. Once those sabers sank in, whatever got bit was basically done for. Blood loss would finish the job even if the initial bite didn't. But here's the thing that should really keep you up at night. This wasn't even the biggest land predator Russia had to offer. Allosaurus fossils turning up in the Russian Arctic is the kind of discovery that makes scientists question everything everything they thought they knew about dinosaur distribution. Finding a 23-foot-long carnivore in Yakutua was not supposed to happen. Allosaurus was supposed to stay in places that made sense, not wander off to the literal edge of the world and set up hunting grounds in what would eventually become the frozen wasteland of Siberia. The Yakutian Allosaurus weighed about as much as a small truck and had teeth designed for maximum damage. Each tooth was serrated and curved, which was perfect for tearing off chunks of meat. The bite wasn't as strong as later predators, but it didn't need to be. This thing hunted by opening its jaws wide and slamming down on prey's neck and back. What really messes with your head is imagining this predator hunting during Arctic winter. Even in the Jurassic, northern Siberia would have had months of darkness. Picture a 2-ton carnivore stalking through snow-covered forests, tracking herds of plant eaters by scent alone. The discovery proves that even 150 million years ago, nowhere on Earth was safe from giant predators. Scientists found Allosaurus remains alongside Stegosaurus bones in the same area, which means the classic predator-prey relationship from Jurassic North America was playing out in the Russian Arctic too. Honestly, the idea of Allosaurus as a polar predator is genuinely unsettling. Of course, there were other large threats that we've also found in Russia though. Here's where prehistoric Russia really started showing off. Estemmenosuchus had a head that looked like someone took a normal skull and just started gluing random spikes and knobs all over it. The name literally means crowned crocodile, which gives you an idea of how confused the scientists were when they first found this thing. This wasn't some small weird creature either. Estemmenosuchus stretched about 12 feet long and probably weighed as much as a small car. But the head is what gets you. Picture a massive skull with bony horns sticking out above the eyes, spikes coming off the cheeks, and random bumps scattered around just because apparently normal faces weren't an option back then. Russian paleontologists found the first Estemmenosuchus fossils in the Perm region, which explains why that area has always had a reputation for being slightly cursed. The creature lived around 260 million years ago, during a time when evolution was clearly still figuring out what worked and what didn't. The weirdest part about Estemmenosuchus is that despite looking absolutely terrifying, it was probably a plant eater. All those spikes and horns weren't for hunting, they were for showing off to other members of its species. Scientists think that males would ram their heads together to prove who was tougher, which honestly sounds about right for prehistoric Russia. The horns weren't even real horns, funny enough. They were just part of the skull bone that grew outward into these bizarre decorations. Each individual actually had slightly different patterns, which means every single Estemmenosuchus had its own unique nightmare face. Living in the harsh Permian deserts of ancient Russia, Estemmenosuchus had to deal with seasonal droughts and the occasional saber-toothed predator trying to make it into lunch. So while some creatures focus on looking intimidating, others just built themselves into walking fortresses. Scutosaurus took a completely different approach to staying alive. It just made itself impossible to kill. The entire animal was covered in thick, bony plates that formed natural armor across its back and sides. Each plate was studded with spikes and ridges, giving Scutosaurus the appearance of a 2-ton pincushion that could walk around and eat plants. Russian scientists have found complete Scutosaurus skeletons, and the bone density is genuinely ridiculous. The armor wasn't just there to look fancy. These plates were thick enough to stop the saber teeth of Inostrancevia, which was no small feat considering those fangs could punch through pretty much anything else alive at the time. Scutosaurus lived in the same harsh Russian environments as the predators we've already talked about, around 252 million years ago. While Inostrancevia was running around with built-in knives, Scutosaurus was just trying to eat ferns in peace. The armor was insurance against becoming someone else's dinner. Its build was low and wide, with stumpy legs that could support all that extra weight. Scutosaurus wasn't winning any speed contests, but it didn't need to. When a predator showed up, the strategy was simple: hunker down, present the armor sides, and wait for the attacker to give up and find easier prey. The skull had its own defensive features too. It had bony horns that stuck out from the cheeks, and the whole head was built thick enough to be used as a battering ram. Scientists think Scutosaurus might have charged at threats head first, which is a genuinely terrifying thought when you consider the thing weighed over a ton. Unfortunately for Scutosaurus though, all of that armor couldn't protect it from the massive extinction event that ended the Permian period. But the real nightmare fuel comes when you realize some predators were just getting started. Turns out all of these giant killing machines had to start somewhere. Kileskus was running around Siberian forests 170 million years ago, basically writing the instruction manual for how to be a tyrannosaur. Russian paleontologists found the first fossils near Krasnoyarsk, and suddenly everyone had to rethink what they knew about when and where the tyrannosaur family got started. At 20 feet long, Kileskus wasn't breaking breaking any size records yet, but what it lacked in bulk, it made up for in being a perfectly designed killing machine. The teeth were already showing that classic Tyrannosaur curve, sharp, serrated, and built for tearing chunks of meat off struggling prey. The arms were still normal size too, which is almost disappointing when you think about how stubby T-Rex arms would eventually become. Kileskus could actually use its hands for grabbing onto prey while delivering devastating bites to the neck and back. What makes Kileskus genuinely disturbing is that it proves Tyrannosaurs were already perfecting their hunting techniques millions of years before they became the monsters everyone knows about. Russian scientists think Kileskus might have even had primitive feathers for insulation during cold Siberian nights. The discovery completely changed how paleontologists think about Tyrannosaur evolution. Before Kileskus showed up, everyone assumed these predators started in warmer climates and spread north later. Turns out they were already setting up shop in what would become Russia, learning how to hunt in forests and deal with seasonal weather changes. Kileskus fossils are still being dug out of the Siberian rock, which is no easy task when you're dealing with remote locations and harsh weather, but every bone they find adds another piece to understanding how these predators went from being merely deadly to becoming legends. And just when you think evolution couldn't get any weirder, along came the feathered dinosaurs, because Kulindadromeus completely broke paleontology in 2014. Scientists found this little dinosaur in Siberia and discovered it was covered in feathers, which wouldn't be that shocking except for one small problem. Kulindadromeus wasn't supposed to have feathers. It wasn't a bird ancestor or even a meat eater. It was just some random plant-eating dinosaur that decided to grow feathers anyway. The discovery made every single paleontologist in the world go back and question everything they thought they knew about dinosaur skin. Suddenly, every museum exhibit showing scaly dinosaurs looked outdated. Kulindadromeus proved that feathers weren't some special bird thing. They were just something dinosaurs did. Russian scientists found these fossils in Transbalaki, Siberia, preserved so well that you can actually see the different types of feathers and scales on the same animal. Some areas had simple fuzzy filaments, other parts had more complex tufted structures, and the tail and legs still had regular scales. Kulindadromeus was small, about the length of a large dog, and spent its time running around Jurassic forests, eating plants, and trying not to get eaten by larger predators. The feathers probably helped it stay warm during cold nights, since even Jurassic Siberia would have had chilly weather. Local authorities in the area were so proud of this discovery that they put Kulindadromeus on their regional coat of arms, which is honestly the most Russian response possible to finding a revolutionary scientific specimen. What really messes with your head is thinking about how many other dinosaurs might have had feathers that we'll never know about because preservation conditions weren't perfect. What else have we got wrong about dinosaurs because the skeletons don't show the full picture? Kulindadromeus suggests that maybe most dinosaurs, in fact, were walking around looking more bird-like than reptile-like. But feathers weren't the only weird thing found in Russia. They also found weird mouths, because Psittacosaurus spent its days in Siberian forests wielding what was essentially a pair of garden shears attached to its face. The beak was built for precision cutting, strong enough to slice through tough plant stems, but sharp enough to crack nuts and seeds. Russian fossils from the Kimrovo region show that Siberian Psittacosaurus were actually some of the largest in their family, reaching around 6 feet long and probably weighing as much as a large person. But the beak wasn't even the strangest part. Psittacosaurus had these weird horn-like bumps sticking out from its cheeks, giving its face a spiky outline that made it look perpetually annoyed. Some species also had bristles on their tails, not feathers, just rigid quill-like structures that they probably used for display or intimidation. The whole setup was bizarre. Here's a plant eater that looks angry all the time, walking around on 2 legs most of the time, but dropping down to all 4s when it wanted to browse on low-growing plants. The strong beak could deliver a nasty pinch to anything that got too close as well, and those cheek spikes meant that grabbing one would be unpleasant for any predator. Psittacosaurus lived in family groups, and fossil evidence suggests the parents actually took care of their young for extended periods. So you'd have these spiky-faced, perpetually grumpy-looking dinosaurs raising their babies in early Cretaceous Siberia, teaching them which plants were worth the effort to chew through. In fact, the Siberian specimens were so well preserved and locally significant that they also ended up on a regional coat of arms, joining Kulindadromeus as official government-endorsed prehistoric creatures. Only in Russia would this happen. I don't know of anywhere else in the world where we have put dinosaurs on coat of arms. But all these small, weird creatures were just the opening act for prehistoric Russia, because everything changes when you start dealing with animals that weigh 20 tons. Tengrisaurus bones were sitting in storage for decades before anyone realized what they had. When Russian scientists finally got around to studying those massive tail vertebrae from Buryatia, they discovered they'd been ignoring the first officially named sauropod dinosaur from Russian territory. Each vertebrae was the size of a large suitcase. Just one section of this animal's tail contained more bone than most complete dinosaur skeletons we found today. The full creature stretched around 40 feet from nose to tail and stood tall enough that you could walk underneath its belly without ducking. 20 tons means Tengrisaurus needed to eat constantly. The gut alone probably weighed several tons when full, and keeping that much digestive system working required massive amounts of plant material every single day. Russian paleontologists think it lived near river systems in early Cretaceous Siberia, where there would have been enough vegetation to support something that big. The ground would shake when herds moved through. Adult Tengrisaurus had no predators once they reached full size. Nothing in their environment could take down something that heavy. The strategy was simple: grow too big for anything to kill you, then spend your days peacefully destroying entire forests worth of trees and other plants. Tengrisaurus represents a turning point in Russian paleontology too. For years, sauropod remains had been found across the country, but never formally studied and named. Having an official Russian giant finally gave local scientists something to point to when talking about their country's dinosaur heritage. The name honors Tengri, a sky god from traditional Siberian beliefs, which seems appropriate for something that could probably see over most of the trees in its forest home. But Siberia apparently couldn't settle for just one walking skyscraper, because the Sibirotitan had the courtesy to announce itself from miles away at the time. Each step would send vibrations through the ground that could be felt long before you actually saw what was causing them. 10 tons of dinosaurs moving through early Cretaceous Siberian forests tends to make an impression on the local wildlife, most of whom probably learned to clear out when they felt those telltale ground tremors. The fossils came from Psittacosaurus, the same site that gave us those spiky-faced Psittacosaurus remains, but finding a few Sibirotitan teeth mixed in with smaller dinosaur bones must have been a shock for the researchers. Going from processing dinosaurs you could probably wrestle with to finding evidence of something that could accidentally step on a house changes the whole dynamic. Sibirotitan teeth were spoon-shaped and designed for stripping leaves off branches in the most efficient way possible. The daily caloric requirements for something that heavy meant entire trees would disappear during feeding sessions. Forests probably looked noticeably different after herds have passed through. If you couldn't tell, the name translates to Siberian Titan, which seems almost understated when you consider that adult specimens were essentially immune to predation. What's going to attack something that weighs as much as 3 elephants? The defense strategy was simple again: be too big for anything to consider you food. Russian paleontologists spent years collecting scattered Sibirotitan bones from the site. A sacrum the length of a coffee table, a vertebrae that required multiple people to lift, and teeth that dwarfed anything else found in the same rock layers. Living near rivers and lakes in ancient Siberia, Sibirotitan herds would migrate between feeding grounds, leaving behind trails of destroyed vegetation and footprints deep enough to form temporary ponds when it rained. Meanwhile, down near the Volga River, an even larger problem was starting to take shape. Volgatitan, which I think is a really cool name by the way, spent 40 years sitting in a Russian museum storage room before anyone bothered to figure out what it actually was. The massive vertebrae of this giant were dug up in the 1980s and filed away with a basic label: just another pile of big dinosaur bones from the Volga region. Museum storage facilities are full of specimens waiting for someone to have the time and funding to properly study them. Volgatitan just happened to wait longer than most. When researchers finally got around to examining the bones in detail, they realized they'd been ignoring something extraordinary. Each vertebrae was bigger than anything else known from that part of Russia at the time. The estimated weight was 17 tons, and it made Volgatitan one of the heaviest dinosaurs ever found in the country. The bones came from early Cretaceous deposits near what's now Yelvanovsk, an area that was coastal plains and river deltas 130 million years ago. Volgatitan lived near ancient shorelines, possibly island hopping between feeding areas or wading through shallow coastal swamps. What bothers paleontologists about this bone that they found is that the formal description mentions other fragmentary remains from the same area that suggests even larger sauropods were present. Volgatitan might not have even been the biggest thing walking around in the Volga region, just the biggest one we've managed to properly identify and name. The delay in studying these fossils highlights a common problem in paleontology. Museums worldwide have storage rooms full of specimens that haven't been formally described. Literally important discoveries that can change everything we know about history can sit on shelves for decades, waiting for someone with the right amount of knowledge and enough money and time to look at them properly. But now let's move on to another giant found in the region. This one came with its own sound system though. What do I mean? Well, Olorotitan could wake up half of ancient Siberia when it felt chatty. You ever have a friend that just talks way too loud when they're hanging out with other people? Yeah, they are this dinosaur. The hollow crest on its head worked as a giant trumpet, and at 26 feet long, everything about this dinosaur was designed to make as much noise as possible. Russian paleontologists found the first complete skeleton in 1999. The discovery immediately explained why other dinosaur species in the area might have developed hearing problems. Its crest was massive. It was a curved, backward sweeping structure that housed complex nasal passages. When air moved through those passages, Olorotitan could produce deep, resonating calls that probably traveled for miles. They sounded somewhat like this. That's just my best guess. That's not like a scientific fact. Imagine living in the forest where something the size of a large vehicle randomly decides to practice its trumpet solos. Each individual had a slightly different crest shape, which means each one produced unique sounds. Herds could have entire conversations using different tones and frequencies. The social structures of these animals was probably incredibly complex, with calls for danger, food, mating, and general announcements about daily activities. Olorotitan lived in the Amur region around 68 million years ago, sharing the landscape with several other loud dinosaur species. The whole ecosystem was essentially a prehistoric noise war, with different species trying to outvolume each other for territory and mates. The nearly complete skeleton revealed something else unique. Olorotitan had an unusually long neck, even for a hadrosaur. This allowed it to reach vegetation high in trees while keeping its enormous body on the ground. Picture something tall enough to look over your house, constantly honking through a built-in megaphone. The local environment was river deltas and floodplains, which would have amplified sound even more. Olorotitan calls probably echoed across the landscape for hours after the original animals stopped making noise from all the echoes. But loud dinosaurs were nothing compared to the ones with seriously disturbing eating habits. Amurosaurus had thousands of teeth, and in fact, they occasionally ate them. Russian scientists figured this out when they found dissolved tooth fragments in the stomach area of fossilized Amurosaurus remains. Apparently, this 8-meter-long hadrosaur was in the habit of swallowing its own shed teeth, either by accident or on purpose. Either option is deeply unsettling. Do you remember that feeling when you were a kid and you lost your baby teeth? Now imagine that going down your throat. That would be uncomfortable. The dental arrangement was already nightmarish enough. Amurosaurus had multiple rows of teeth that formed continuous grinding surfaces. Essentially, it had a living industrial food processor built into their skulls. These teeth were constantly being shed and replaced throughout their lives, creating a never-ending supply of calcium-rich snacks. Ooh, extra crunchy. Why would something eat its own teeth though? Well, researchers think it might have been an accident. When you're cropping vegetation with hundreds of sharp teeth, some are bound to come loose and get swallowed. But there's also the possibility that Amurosaurus deliberately ate shed teeth to recycle the calcium and other minerals back into their system. The stomach contents of fossilized Amurosaurus specimens show evidence of this tooth-eating behavior happening quite regularly. We're talking about an animal that produced several thousand teeth over its lifetime and apparently decided that letting all that calcium go to waste was poor resource management. Amurosaurus lived in herds along the Amur River, grinding through enormous amounts of plant material every day. The sound of entire herds feeding must have been constant crunching and grinding, punctuated by the occasional crunch of someone accidentally biting down on their own freshly shed tooth. The hollow crest on their heads meant they could communicate while eating, probably coordinating group feeding sessions and warning each other about predators. The combination of constant tooth production, regular tooth consumption, and loud trumpeting calls makes Amurosaurus herds some of the most active and noisy plant eaters in the Cretaceous Russia. Yet, some dinosaurs managed to survive on much smaller scales in much tougher conditions than this, because island living forced Nipponosaurus into the dinosaur equivalent of moving to a studio apartment. Japanese scientists found the first fossils on Sakhalin Island back in 1934 when the island was under Japanese control control. After World War II, the territory became part of Russia, and somehow nobody has managed to find any more Nipponosaurus fossils there since. Either the original discovery was incredibly lucky, or there are more specimens sitting under Sakhalin waiting for someone to dig them up. Nipponosaurus was a hadrosaur, one of those duck-billed plant eaters, but living on an island had forced it to downsize. The known specimen was only about 15 feet long max, which is tiny compared to its mainland relatives that could reach tons and tons of feet. Island animals often shrink over time when resources are limited, and Nipponosaurus seems to have gotten the memo. The skull lacked the fancy crest that other hadrosaurs used for making noise. On an island, being loud might attract the wrong kind of attention from predators, or it might just be a waste of energy when your whole population lives in a small area anyways. Nipponosaurus kept things simple. Flat skull, basic duck bill, focused on staying fed and avoiding danger. Life on Cretaceous Sakhalin was probably a constant balance between finding enough plants to eat and not becoming food for something else. Islands create weird ecosystems where the normal rules don't always apply. Predators might be smaller than usual, but they might also be more desperate and willing to take risks, which means they might be more aggressive. The single specimen found on Sakhalin represents one of the last hadrosaurs to live before the end Cretaceous extinction. Island populations often survive longer than mainland ones during mass extinctions, but eventually even islands can't protect you from a global catastrophe. Speaking of which, one dinosaur had the misfortune of being absolutely last. Riabininohadros holds the unfortunate distinction of being among the very last dinosaurs to walk Russian soil. To be clear, this dinosaur has also been found in the Ukraine area and they border on the same region, so just putting that out there. Crimean fossils from this duck-billed herbivore date to within 2 million years of the end Cretaceous extinction event. While giant predators and massive plant eaters were thriving in other parts of the world, this dinosaur was stuck on what was essentially a large island in the ancient Tethys Sea, watching the world slowly change around it. At only 23 feet long max, this dinosaur was another island dwarf, smaller than its mainland cousins, but probably tougher and more adaptable. Crimea in the late Cretaceous was isolated enough that normal evolutionary pressures didn't apply. The animals that lived there had to make do with whatever resources the island provided. Soviet geologist Anatoly Ryabin first identified the fossils in 1934, though it took decades for paleontologists to realize what they had, because once again the bones sat in collections for years before anyone properly studied them and realized they belonged to one of Europe's youngest dinosaur species. But it also meant limited genetic diversity and nowhere to go when conditions changed. Island populations can often survive local disasters, but they're sitting ducks when global catastrophes hit. This dinosaur survived right up until the asteroid impact that ended the Mesozoic era. After 165 million years of dinosaur dominance, after surviving multiple mass extinctions and climate changes, after spreading across every continent and adapting to every possible environment, it all came down to a space rock hitting the Yucatan Peninsula. And that's how Russians' age of nightmare creatures finally came to an end. Let me know which dinosaur was your favorite to learn about in this video, and comment other dinosaurs you would like me to talk about in future uploads. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like the video and also give it hype, because that's one of the best ways for small YouTubers like me to get their videos out there. Also subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. If you want to watch another video right now, here's a good one on screen.